Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and cover flow control, and then we'll get into loops as well. So first I'll go over what is flow control, then we'll head into the planning phase, and then we'll get into flowcharts, some pseudocode, and then we'll start to learn about if-else statements, switch statements, and then we'll get into the loops, starting with the while loop. We'll go over what is input validation. We'll get into the do loops. There's the do while and the do until loops, and then as well as the for loops and the for each loops. All right, so first up is what is flow control. So a computer, despite how much processing power it can have, is going to only process one thing at a time. It may do it very quickly, but it is going to do things one by one. So it is the job of the programmer to create a script using proper commands to make decision making easier. So flow control will allow for the use of operators to assist in making decisions using scripting. So whatever you want to be run first, you have to tell that computer to run it first, basically. All right, so now let's go ahead and jump into planning. So planning in PowerShell and coding in general, you're going to create a plan of action for the flow of the script prior to coding. So you can do this first by creating a flowchart of the expected output pending the evaluation of a condition until the script exits or terminates. So after you create the flowchart, then you can use that to create your pseudocode. So here's an example down here. We have an idea. How can I determine if a number is odd or even? So then we go and create a flowchart of how we want that to be done. So we get the start here. We go down into the conditions, and then we exit down here. So now once we've created the flowchart, then we go ahead and make some pseudocode. So in our pseudocode here, we've got going to receive a number. We're going to see, is the number divisible by 2? So in PowerShell, you would do that with the modulus operator. So if the number mod 2 is equal to 0, then it's even, else it will be odd. All right, so now I'll go to a little bit more detail of how to create a flowchart. So when creating a flowchart, it's important when you're dealing with more difficult problems to kind of break them down and solve them in simple terms. So first you want to collect your thoughts before you even start to begin coding. And then you can kind of just write it out in everyday language as to what your plan of attack will be. And so here on the right, we've got the symbols that we use in writing a flowchart. So this marks the start of a process right here. We've got this symbol, and we just have lines showing where we're wanting things to go. And then we've got our little symbol here that's going to represent input or output operations. And we just have squares that denote a process to be carried out. And then we have the diamond shape, which represents a decision or a branch. So real quick, here are a couple resources for making flowcharts, and when we go into our projects, so this can be useful for you guys. So we've got Lucidchart here up top. You can Google that, as well as draw.io. And then you can always just do them in a PowerPoint or hand drawn on paper. Personally, I just prefer to hand draw them on paper, but I'm not very good at graphic design. So, all right. So next, let's go and jump into pseudocode. So after planning out a flowchart, it's important to write this into pseudocode. So pseudocode does not have to have correct syntax, and each pseudocode will look a little bit different depending on the person's experience. So you can include the syntax if that's something you struggle with, but ideally the pseudocode is just to kind of give you an understanding of what your code should kind of look like. So there's really no standard for pseudocode. It's sort of like a rough draft of your code before you start to type it all out. The only standard, if working with a team, the whole team should be able to read the pseudocode to understand what's going on and what they're going to be working on. Now I'll go ahead and cover if-else statements. So if-else statements are used when there is a decision that needs to be made, and there are two possible results, result A and result not equal to A. So if you date an airman, receive Article 15. So that's an example of just an if statement. So now let's do an if-else statement. If you study, then pass PowerShell and probably use CWT. Else, security forces needs good officers too. So here you've got, if you do this, right, then you're going to pass this class. Else, so if this condition isn't met, then this condition gets executed. So the key components here are the if keyword, you've got your conditional statement, you have your code statements, the else keyword, again, code statement as well down here. All right, so here's an example of what it will look like in PowerShell with the correct syntax. So here we are setting our variable x equal to 9, and then we're creating an if-else statement. So we have if variable x is less than 10, it will print out x is less than 10. So it would actually print out 9 is less than 10 here. Else, so if this isn't met, then it's going to say variable x, in this case 9, is more than or equal to 10. So obviously, we all know x is 9, so 9 is going to be less than 10. So this is the code statement that will be printed out. 9 is less than 10. So let's say we change the variable x to equal 11 here, then it's going to check, is 11 less than 10? No. Okay, so now we're going to go down here, and it's going to execute else, and it will say 11 is more than or equal to 10. All right, so I'm back in ISE here, and I'm going to go ahead and show you guys an example of an if-else statement. So I've got my CLS at the top. We're going to make a ride the roller coaster. All right, so that's what this code is going to be about. So first we're going to go and put name equals read host. Please enter your name. All right, so now we're going to go ahead. This is going to give us the name of whoever wants to ride the roller coaster. And we want to see if they are tall enough to ride it. So we're going to ask them for their height. So it's going to be a number variable. So height is equal to read host. Enter your height in inches. All right. So now we're going to go ahead and create our if-else statement. So we've got if height is greater than or equal to, say, for instance, 48. So 48 inches. Then we will write name may ride the coaster. Else, so this is going to execute if they are not equal to or greater than 48, then it will write name may not ride the coaster. All right, so let's go and run this. All right, so please enter your name. So Chris, enter your height in inches. So let's put 60. Chris may ride the coaster. All right, so 60, again here, 60 is greater than or equal to 48. So that's why this part executed. Let's run it again. Please enter your name. Chris. So enter your height. So let's do something less than 48. So let's do 47. Chris may not ride the coaster. So again here we see our height is 47. That is not greater than or equal to 48. So the else portion of this code gets executed and prints out. All right, so here's another example of an if-else again. And so here at the top, we've got our variable weather is equal to read host. What is the forecast for today? And we've got sun, rain, and snow. So here's an example of how to use multiple embedded else's into an if-else. So we've got if weather is equal to rain, then it's going to write remember your umbrella. And then else if, so instead of just putting else, you can actually add another if here. So else if weather is equal to sun, then it's going to write host remember your sunglasses. And then finally, so if neither of these conditions are met, it will output the else here. Write host take a warm hat and gloves. So what is the expected output here? Also, it's going to ask the user for their input. So if they input rain, then it's going to put remember your umbrella. If they put snow, well, okay, we don't have one set for snow. Here we've just got rain and sun, so it's just going to execute this last portion and print out, take a warm hat and gloves. All right, so next I'm going to go ahead and cover switch statements. So if statements only check one conditional statement one time. So switch statements are a little bit similar, but they have the ability to check multiple conditional statements one time. So the switch statement will list each condition in an optional action. If the condition is true, then it will perform the action. So here we've got switch, and then what's going to be in the parentheses next to it is going to be the test value, and then we're going to have the brackets here, and there's going to be the first condition and then the second condition. And if one of those is met, it'll do the action next to it, and it'll go through and it's going to run everything that'll be in this switch. All right, so now I can show you an example. I'm back here in ISE. So I've got my variable x set to 1, and I've got my switch flow control set up here. So let's go and make some conditions here. So let's say 1, and 2, and then 3. So what this is going to do is if x is equal to any of these, then it will do whatever we put in here. So let's say it is 1, and then let's put, it'll print out it is 2, and then if it's 3, it is 3. All right, so as you can see up here, we've got x is 1. So when I run this, it should print out it is 1. So there we go, it is 1. So let's go ahead and change the variable now to be 2. There we go, it prints out it is 2. Let's change it to 3, run it again, and it is 3. So now if we change this to be none of these, change it to be 4, so we don't have a condition of 4, it's actually just not going to print out anything. See? So in order to change that, we can put default, and we can make a condition here. So we could put it is neither 1, 2, or 3. So we run this, and there we go. It's going to print out it is neither 1, 2, or 3. So again, that's the default there at the end. But mainly what I want you to focus on here is these conditions being met here, the 1, 2, and 3. So one more time here, it's 1, prints out it is 1. It's just going to go through the first one, do that, and it runs through these as well, but since those conditions aren't met, it's just not going to do anything. All right, so as I sort of mentioned, the switch statement goes through every single condition, even if there's a match in a previous condition. So in order to direct this switch statement to stop comparing after a match is found, we utilize the break statement. The break statement then terminates the switch statement, and I'll go over back to IC and show you an example of this. All right, so I'm back to the example I had earlier. So let's go ahead and put another 2 condition here. Print out it is 2 again. All right, so now when I run this, since we've got x set equal to 2 here, it's going to print out, it's going to do both of these. See, it's going to go there, yep, it is 2, and it is 2 again. So if we want it to stop after it meets just this 1, we put a semicolon here, we put break, and then we go ahead and close that off. So now it's going to run through, it's going to see that this one has been met, it's going to break, and it will only print out that one. So there we go. All right, and then here's the slide on the default part, which I sort of went over earlier. So again, it's just a switch statement might also use the keyword default at the end of the switch statement, and it sort of acts like an else in an if-else statement. If there are no matches found in the previous conditional statements, then the default statement will execute. As you can see here in the example, sort of like what I did in IC, we've got a is equal to 6 here, and so it doesn't meet these, so the default is it is not 1 through 4. So if you ran this, it would just print out it is not 1 through 4. All right, now here are some exercises that you guys should go ahead and try to work out on your own. So go ahead and pause the video, try to work out and make sure you can keep up with doing this, and if not, go back over which parts you didn't understand. So now I can go and dive into loops. So in computer science, a loop is a programming structure that repeats a sequence of instructions until a specific condition is met. So programmers use loops to cycle through values, and it adds sums of numbers, repeats functions, and many other things. So basically anything you want to be repeated, you would use a loop to do, and this can save a lot of time and just kind of set up things to be done multiple times. So let's say you want to have a user enter multiple numbers. It'd be very easy to do this with a loop. So two of the most common loops are while loops and for loops. And in this video, I will be discussing while loops, do while, do until, for loops, and then finally for each loops. So in the next few days while working with loops, it's very likely that you will either purposely or accidentally create an infinite loop. So an infinite loop is something in which it has no termination point. So two methods in order to stop this loop would be in either pressing Control plus C on your keyboard, as long as you're on a Windows system. I know sometimes this won't work on like a Mac. And then so you can also press the stop button, which you see here. That'll be at the top of ISE. All right, so now I'll go ahead and show you an example of an infinite loop and how to stop it. So let's say we make variable x equal to 1, and then we create a while loop. So while x is equal to 1, we will print hello world. So there we go. It's just going to keep printing it over and over again. I got to press the stop button. Right, so what we've got here, x is equal to 1, and then we've got while x is equal to 1. It's going to keep printing this out. So this is never going to be changed. X is never changing here. So because of that, this condition is always going to be true. So while this is true is what this is asking, print out this. So it's just going to continuously do it forever. As you can see, it can scroll up. Went on for quite a bit here, all the way up there. And so now I can kind of get into a little bit more about while loops. So I just kind of showed you an example, but so while loops are checking one condition over and over while the condition is true and only escapes the loop when the condition becomes false. So as I kind of showed you, x was always equal to 1, so it just kept running through over and over again. So here's kind of a visual representation of how this loop works. So we've got x equals 8, while x is less than 10. It's going to say x is less than 10, and then we're going to add 1 to it, so it's going to run through here. And so right here it's going to be 9. So is x still less than 10? Yes, it's going to run through again. Now it's going to be 10. So is 10 less than 10? Nope, it's equal to it, so it's going to escape here. It's going to say it's 10 or more. All right, so a little bit more into while loops here. So the key components of a while loop is obviously the while keyword, and then the conditional statement that'll go next to it. So our example here, we've got num is not equal to 1, and then obviously our code statements. So here it's going to be what's inside of these brackets. So it's important to always remember to increment or decrement or some sort of change to the variable that is being evaluated in the conditional statement to avoid an infinite loop. And then something to note here is this, that PowerShell doesn't care about spaces and indents, but if you use them in your code, it is far easier to read. So if we took out the spaces here and num equals num minus 1, if we took all those spaces out, it's still going to run, but it just looks a little bit nicer and it's easier to read. So now for an exercise, I want you guys to go ahead and try to create a while loop that will count to 10 and then exit the loop. And then, so go ahead and pause the video and do that, and then I'll show you guys how to do it. All right, so I'm back in ISE here, and so far all I've got is x being set equal to 1. So now we're going to do while x is less than or equal to 10. Now we're going to go and create our brackets. So what we're going to want to do here is print out x, and then we're going to increment x by adding 1, which again is just, you can use plus plus. You can also do plus equals 1. We're going to go and put plus plus. So now, as you can see there, it prints out 1. through 10. Alright, so now I've got another example up here of a while loop. So we've got while x is less than 12. As we see up here, it's 1, so we know it's going to run through at least once. So right host x is less than 12, so it's going to print that out, and then it looks like it's just going to add 1 to x here. So go ahead and pause the video and try to think of what the expected output would be of this, and then I'll show you. Alright, so here is the expected output. So it's going to print out 1 is less than 12 all the way up to 11. And then once you get to 11, it's going to see that x is 12. So 12 will not be less than 12, so it will stop running through this. Alright, so now I'm going to get into what is input validation. So input validation ensures the input from the user is what is expected. So for example, if you're asking the user to enter either 1 or 2, you want to make sure that the user can only enter those two numbers. And one way to perform input validation is to use a while loop. So here we've got number is set equal to 0, and then we've got while number is not equal to 1 and number is not equal to 2. It's going to print out, please enter number 1 or 2. And so it's going to keep asking the user to do that until it gets 1 or 2. Alright, so I'm back here in ISE again. I'm going to go and put my CLS at the top. And now, just like in the example, I'm going to go and put number equals 0. And then we're going to create the while loop here. So while number is not equal to 1 and number is not equal to 2. Go and set up our brackets here and put integer number equals read host. Please enter 1 or 2. So again, now we've got our condition up here. While number is not equal to 1 and number is not equal to 2. So it's going to keep running this as long as that condition is not met. So it's going to continue to ask the user to input this number. So I'll go and run this. There we go. Please enter 1 or 2. So if I enter 3, it's going to ask again. Enter 4, it'll ask again. 0, ask again. 1, it ends. So now I go ahead and go over the do while loops. So the do while loop is very similar to the while loop, but instead of evaluating the conditional statement at the beginning, or it'd be up here, it actually checks it at the end. So as you can see in this example, we've got do num equals read host, enter number between 1 and 10, and it's going to do that while number is less than 1 or number is greater than 10. So because the condition is at the end here, it's always going to run this loop at least once. It's always going to execute the code that's inside here at least one time. And it's going to continue to run through this until the condition at the end is met. So again, do while loops will always run at least once. All right, so now there's the do until loops. So again, the do until loops are similar to the do while loops, except that the do until loop will exit the loop once the condition reaches true. So the do while runs until the condition is false, do until runs until it is true. So again, just like the do while loop, it's always going to run at least one time because the condition is at the end. Alright, so now I'll go and show you guys an example in ISE of both of the do loops. So first here I've got my do while loop set up. And I've got my code statement here, enter a number between 1 and 10, again making sure that's set to an integer. And then I've got my conditional statement down here by the while, so while num is less than 1 or num is greater than 10. So it's going to continue to ask the user to input a number until it gets one that is between 1 and 10. Just going to run this. See there, enter a number between 1 and 10. So if I put 11, it's going to ask me again. If I put 0, it'll ask me again. If I put 10, there we go. It ends it there because 10 is not greater than 10, so it's in between there. Run it one more time. So let's go -1, 11, and then 5. So there we go. Whenever this condition stops being true, it ends. Alright, so now I'll go ahead and do the same thing, but I'll change while to until. So try and try to figure out what the outcome of this would be. And then, so I'll go ahead and run this. So enter a number between 1 and 10. So I give it a 5, and it's going to ask again there. So now I give it a, say, 12, and it stops running. So why did this happen? So as I went over earlier, the do while runs while this is true. So until will run until this conditional statement is met. So again, the do while is running while this condition statement is true. Once it becomes false, then it stops running. We're doing this until this condition is met. So we've got enter a number between 1 and 10. So it's going to ask the user to enter a number, and it's going to do that until that number is outside of these parameters. All right, so now I'll go ahead and jump into the for loops. So for loops will increment until a condition is met. So the key components of a for loop is the for keyword, obviously, which you see here on the right. And then we've got the variable initialization. So here we've got variable I is equal to 0, so we're initializing I here. The conditional statement, which, so here's the second part, I less than 10. And then at the end there, the third one, variable modification. So again there, we have variable initialization, conditional statement, and then variable modification. And then again here we've got our code statements within the curly brackets, so you should be noticing a trend here with all of them. With all the loops we've gone over so far, they have the code statements in curly brackets. And something to note here is that for loop conditions are separated by semicolons and not commas. Again, commas are used in arrays. So again here we've got semicolons separating the variable initialization, conditional statement, and modification. Alright, so now I'll show you guys an example of the for loop. Let's go ahead and set this up. So for variable I is equal to 0. We've got our semicolon. I less than 10. And then our modification here, I plus plus. So every time this runs through, it's going to add 1 to I. So it's going to start at 0. It's going to run through. It's going to add 1 to that 0. So every time this runs, it'll go from 0, then to 1, to 2, all the way up until we get to 10. So once it reaches 10, it's no longer going to run through. So again, we've got our curly brackets here. And we're going to go and print out I is less than 10. So it's going to run this as many times until I gets to here. So there we go. 0 is less than 10, 1 is less than 10, all the way up until 9 is less than 10. And then obviously it stops running because 10 is not less than 10. Alright, so now we're at the last loop I'm going to cover, which is for each loops. So for each loops in PowerShell are used to iterate through an array. They will allow you to define the element or item you wish to use as a placeholder for the current object and the loop. So here we've got a little bit of syntax here for each item in array, and then do stuff, whatever you want to be done to those items. So the for each will go through every item in the array and perform whatever function you choose. So I'll go ahead and show you guys a little bit more into detail in this in the next slide. Alright, so here's how the for each loops can be set up. So here we've got our array 1 through 5, and then we've got our for each loop set up. So in the item section, the for each item in array, you can name this anything you want, and it'll just go through the items in the array. So again, as I kind of went over earlier, you want to make sure to name things, stuff that makes sense, because obviously if you've got for each pink fluffy bunny in my array and someone's looking at your code, you're probably going to have no idea what you're talking about. but again, it will still work, and I'll show you guys an example of this in ISE. Alright, so now I'm back in ISE, and I'm going to go and show you what we can do with a for each loop. So let's go and create an array, and make it 1 through 10, and then for each. So again, you can name this item, you can name it anything, so we're going to name it number. So for each number in array. Now we've got our brackets here. Now we're going to go ahead and combine some stuff that we've done earlier. So let's go and create an if number modulus 2 is equal to 0, then we want this number to store into a text file named evens.txt. Else, we want the number to go into a text file called odds.txt. So what this is going to do, so we've got our creating an array at the top there, 1 through 10, and then we're searching through this array, or sorting through it, numbers. So for each number in the array, if the number is divisible by 2 with a remainder of 0, it's an even number, so we're going to put that into an evens text file, else put the number into an odds text file. So now I'm going to go in at the top here, create these blank text files, evens.txt and odds.txt. So now I'll go and run this. So it should have created the text files now and put those number in there. So let's go and get content of evens.txt. As we can see here, we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. And let's go ahead and check the contents of odds.txt. There we go, we have the odds number in this text file. Alright, so now here are some exercises that you guys can go and do and try to familiarize yourself with the loops. So we've got 4 exercises on this page, so go ahead and pause it and try to do those. And then here are 2 more. The last one, a little bit harder if you want more of a challenge. And if you really want a challenge, you can try to start with 0, 1. If it's more comfortable for you. Alright, so just go over a little bit of a summary of what I went over today. We went over flow control, what is flow control, how to do planning, how to do a flow chart, and some good resources for those, some pseudocode and how to do that. And we went over if-else statements, switch statements, and then we went into loops, going through the while loop, do while loops, do until loops, for loops, and then finally the for each loops. And then we also went over input validation and how to implement that into certain loops.